Good afternoon and welcome to Strategies for Enhancing Email Security while Ensuring Deliverability, a health system CIO Media Inc. production sponsored by Mimecast. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Health System CIO, and I'll be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You can send in your questions or comments at any time in the Q&A box, and we'll take them later in the program. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, we're going to go about 40 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring Julian Mihai, CISO, Penn Medicine, University of Pennsylvania Health System, Steve Ramirez, VP and CISO with Renown Health, and Edwin Moreno, Field CTO with Mimecast, and then we will have our Q&A. So let's jump right in. This is a super important topic. Julian, let's start with you. Can you give us an overview of your organization and your role?
Yeah, happy to, and thanks for having me, Anthony. Penn Medicine, or University of Pennsylvania Health System, is a large academic medical health center based in the greater Philadelphia area and southern New Jersey. We have 6 large hospitals in the area, 100+ ambulatory practices, and of course, the School of Medicine, which is one of the leading research and academic facilities in the country.
Very good. Thank you, Julian. Steve?
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Stephen Ramirez, and I am with Renown Health. Renown Health is the Reno, Tahoe-based health system. We have 4 hospitals up there. We are the area trauma, have Children's Hospital, Cancer Center, and also an affiliation with UNR that's about in a year of its infancy on that relationship. So excited to be here.
Very good, Steve. Thank you. Edwin?
Anthony, thanks for having me. And a pleasure just being here with Julian and Stephen. So Edwin Moreno, I'm Field CTO over at Mimecast, where we really focus around what we call work protected and really helping protect communication channels, data, and people when it comes to cybersecurity here. Been with the organization for about 8 years here, and it's been really interesting to see how email has continued to evolve, seems like on a day-to-day basis. So very excited for today's conversation.
All right, very good. Let's jump right into it. Julian, we're going to start with you. This webinar is built around the premise that email is both the most important communications medium for health systems, probably all businesses, and the #1 threat vector for cyber attacks. Do you agree with that concept, that idea?
Yeah, I certainly do. I think at least in numbers, in the #1 is the #1 threat vector, just the sheer volume, the type of protocols. So definitely a top focus for us, like any other CISO.
All right, very good. Steve?
I do agree, and I actually pulled some stats, did my homework for you. So on average, we get about 3 million external emails sent to us, and we send about 7.8 million internally. So very important for internal communications, even with the uprise of Teams. So,
okay, so definitely, Edwin, your thoughts?
I mean, I think the numbers probably shift every day, but still around 90% plus threats still start with email. So I think it is 100% still the #1 threat vector, but it is good, and Steve already kind of touched on this a little bit. Other communication channels are continuing to expand here. I think COVID, definitely escalated that a bit, right? So organizations, whether they're using Slack or Teams or just different communication channels, you can still send malicious URLs, you can still send malicious attachments there. So just making sure that that's also a point of focus too.
Yeah, and I just I just read an article about something going on with Slack, an attack that's through Slack that has to do with Wikipedia pages, which I posted to my LinkedIn account. I sort of posted this article, and it was just mind-blowing what they're coming up with, the bad guys. That was a Slack-specific vulnerability. So take a look at that when you get a chance. Very good. All right, moving on. Steve, we're going to start with you on this one. What are you doing to ensure that malicious emails don't get through? We're sort of going to take this in 2 parts. First, we're going to address stopping the malicious emails, and then we're going to talk about letting the good emails through. But I think one of the points that we're going to make today is that you have to be very careful about locking things down to the point that things aren't being delivered, legitimate emails aren't being delivered, because that is also a very bad place to be. So we'll talk about that. So we've got different types of bad emails. You've got emails with bad links or attachments. So download this attachment and open it, and now it's going to release something bad, or click on this link and you wind up somewhere bad. So those should be like identifiable somehow. Emails that have no bad links or attachments. So just text email, but maybe the start of a spear phishing campaign. So perhaps the origin, can be an identifier there, where it's coming from. But in and of itself, it's just maybe text. It's just the start, the beginning of a spear phishing campaign. And talk about the difference between email going into a spam folder versus outright rejection. So the rejection thing is a little scary to people trying to do business, because if it's not going to spam filter, if there's no opportunity for the recipient to review it and make a determination, if you're making that determination for them and you get it wrong, they never see it, and it's likely that the sender receives no information about it being rejected or undeliverable. It's gone. It went into the ether. That's a tough place to be, both for the receiver and the sender. So, Steve, your thoughts?
So yeah, it's very complex, as you had just laid it out. So we have to institute a defense in depth, for security in general, but specifically for email. So as you just spoke to, there's a multitude of mechanisms for the bad guys sending it out. QR codes is the new way too. That's happened in the past few weeks, that they're sending that, and that's bypassing all these various other filters we are. So just as technologies are being able to adapt to links and attachments, with the safe links and other tools of the world, which almost everybody uses something on top of Microsoft nowadays, like the Proofpoint, Cofences, and those of the world, to really just add that second layer of filtering onto everything. So really using that cohort of Microsoft inherent based tools, these secondary tools, and then kind of having that mix on where you set the threshold at each of those levels. So, we call them known IOCs. So that's really where we can go through and just make a best guess effort. At the Microsoft level, it's 1 through 5. So obviously all security guys would want to put 5, but as you said, that'd be a business disruptor on just blocking everything. So that goes into the mix of, safe links, educating your users on what they should be looking for, that annoying barcode at the top of all emails is saying this is, from an external sender, hovering over safe links, just the different multitudes of things you have to put into a single email to try to ensure that you're protecting your organization are just very vast. And then the back end pieces that really go behind that, from if somebody does click on a malicious email, what's triggered on the back end. I think that's really the first onset of, automation capabilities through SOAR and other technologies. If somebody does click a link, that the lights are flashing in your SOC and SIM, et cetera, with that, to isolate, reset passwords, and everything to that. It is so complex that I outsource phishing from the end-to-end lifecycle, that if somebody pushes a button, reports it as phishing, that goes to my managed service partner. They do the triage. A lot of that's built in automation, and that they actually respond to the end user. So we've seen that as one of the biggest pieces that, everyone say, tell security if you're, you have some bad emails going through, but again, nobody responds sometimes. So, we make an effort. If somebody individually reaches out to the information security team, we'll respond to those, but also our managed service partner does that, to really go through and look at that. So it is a very big mix, as you see, but it's a continual battle of whack-a-mole. Things still get through even with all those tools and everything else we put on. So it's just partnering with your business if we're blocking things. There's legacy emails, and name aliases that you might have had at the early onsets, especially through acquisitions, that your organization might have that still have critical stuff through the government, which, is an act of Congress to get something for like 304 or any of those, government communications, that once they have an email, you can never change it. So that's really kind of the challenges on what you have to continue to work with to not be disruptive. So,
Steve, you mentioned this is setting things to a 5. I think that was a Microsoft specific thing you're talking about.
Yes, it's a 1 through 5 generally. So it's not a lot of stuff, because it's a lot to individually go through, and it's generally based off of IOCs to what is blocked. So known IOCs generally got blocked by Microsoft or these other more enhanced levels through these secondary parties of the world. So
But you're saying if you set it to a 5, you're going to block legitimate emails as well. So that's
yes.
not something you want to do.
So you have to find generally like a 3 is where we're seeing is like a sweet spot. A 4 probably blocks too much, but then that gets into setting up a quarantine folder. So then we actually just did a fish for our organization yesterday to send out a makeshift what a quarantine folder looks like for people to go click on that as part of our, you know, phishing simulation, is just because that sends out as another mechanism to say, okay, we think these meet the thresholds of phishing, spam, etc. Here's basically, you know, your laundry list of the day. Go through and release anything that you do say. So we try to do a little bit more self-service. So that's our way, to your point, of not just blocking or us, you know, sending something into that deep dark hole. That does allow people sometimes to release legitimate phishing emails, though. So that's where we also have emails set up and mechanisms to then protect against that secondarily. So somebody will pull it out and we're like, well, that was the tools did its job, but people still, so that's kind of
crazy.
that mixture. Yeah.
That's blowing my mind. That's blowing my mind that it was flagged by the systems. It's in the spam folder. It is a spam email. It's a phishing email. And even though it's sort of been flagged, it still can get released. And you're seeing that.
And people still click on the links, but at least at that level that they pulled it all the way out, I'm sure that my colleagues, they'll tell you at that point, they're like, well, I pulled it out of my spam and I think it looked a little fishy, and they basically realize that what they just did. So
they probably should not have done that.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. That's great. Julian, just give me your thoughts wherever you want to jump in here.
Yeah, no, I just want to build a little bit more upon what Stephen said, which I couldn't agree more. I think with email, it's one of those type of attacks with a natural language involved, with the links. All of that can change in an infinite way. And the bad guys are just going to work and rework their phishing emails until they pass the email filters. I mean, we just need to be aware that those bad guys, it's easy for them to buy a subscription from a security vendor, and they're going to tweak their malware attack until it makes past the preventative measure. So really the defense in depth and the zero trust approach that we all need to have, I feel it's key. So on one side, probably a big topic, maybe we'll get into later more in depth, about really training and preparing the workforce to be your eyes and be able to alert us, be the first to know, so we can limit the impact, meaning the cybersecurity team. And then on the flip side, look at all the other aspects, assuming that something made it past the email filter. Do you have advanced endpoint protection on the computer to act as another layer? Do we have a really good secure email gateway? Maybe that can prevent it ahead of time. Do you have an ability to contain the threat? Let's say ultimately a computer gets infected, somebody's computer certainly will get infected. Can you limit the impact to that computer? I mean, the whole idea is to buy yourself more time to detect and react. So a lot more to say there. I guess the other thing I wanted to switch a little bit over to the usability factor and the friction. Indeed, it's really, really key to not, for us to not block something that might be a critical email. I mean, it could be, gosh, anything I can think, from a grant application deadline to something really critical that comes through email. And the challenge, in fact, is some of these services send thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes millions emails, or a trade association that can easily be marked as spam by some filters, and that really can lead to a critical impact for someone. So really need to be careful with that as well. So a big challenge indeed.
Yeah, for sure. Edwin, your thoughts?
I mean, these two gentlemen have hit most of it, but I think just to kind of add on to both of them, it's the defense in depth approach, and even looking at simple things like attachments. Most vendors, you can simply block some attachments by file type. So make a decision, like, do you ever actually want to allow an executable in your corporate email environment? The answer should probably be no. So even making very binary decisions, I don't even want these file types. But then, allowing things like antivirus, that's perfect for known attacks, but then you probably want to do some zero-day sandboxing on top of that. So just making, and that's just an attachment, for an example. So making sure that you have different kind of technologies, but that are complementary, that are not overly redundant, is vital. I think the data visibility of this part is also big, and hopefully we'll get into a lot of automation here. You need not only for stopping these things, but actually sharing the IOCs to your endpoints, to your SIMs, to your source, because no solution by itself will ever be bulletproof. If something makes it even past a Mimecast, I might want to rely on my endpoint to tell me, hey, did you know about this attachment? And actually feed those IOCs to me as well, because that's how we're going to protect moving forward as well. So I think there's this whole kind of community approach that we always need to take in mind. And the last thing that I'll say is more around the balance of what do we stop versus what do we deliver. I think, Stephen, you mentioned the whole banner, like mark everything as external. A lot of organizations do it. I always refer to it as the boy that cried wolf, though, because you see that on every single message. So there might be an in-between. Maybe you actually do dynamic banners where you only apply banners when certain criteria has been met. That way, maybe the end user will actually not turn a blind eye to it, will actually action off if they don't see those banners every single time. So I think there's a lot that we can do here, but there's actually a lot of simple things that I think you can do as well. So like even starting with what you want to allow and not allow to go through.
All right, very good. Okay, next question. We're going to start with Julian on this one. What are you doing around employee education and phishing tests to keep employees from engaging with malicious emails that get through to their inboxes? Do you feel there should be rewards, punishments, or a combination of both for those who fail phishing tests?
Oh yeah, that's an interesting question. Tackle first the first part. We do, I think, what most everybody else does. We have phishing simulations on a monthly basis. We have once per year, when it's a cyber awareness month, we do a lot of very focused, in large numbers, kind of training and webinars, and going to engage with our staff, and many other things. I think what I would comment here is it's about how you do it. So I found over time that it's much more important to do very small focused impression for the most impact and retention. I know traditionally you want to give everybody a complex list of everything that they could face, but the reality is that, particularly in an environment such as mine, where it's healthcare folks, physicians, clinicians have limited time, they're not technology focused, folks trying to explain to them all the IT and the threats are not necessarily going to be most effective, but just telling them, like, not more in a paragraph. Here is the current situation that's prevalent, that we're observing. Here's what you should do about it. And allow them to just, without scrolling the email up and down, without having big logos, giving that impression. I was really thankful to see a feedback from our business relationship leaders recently say, look, we really love that stuff. It's short, it's to the point, it's a brief snippet. We learn it. And I see it in the numbers as well. I mean, from a phishing campaign, we in a matter of minutes somebody reports it, and that gives us such a huge leg. And again, doing this kind of impactful communication, I think it's a key part. I'll go into really quickly on the second part of the question. I'm not really big in either rewards or punishment as a blanket. I do think at the margin, well, we do something with rewards, like we congratulate folks, and with that reports are all phishing simulations in a period of time. We thank them, we give them various tokens of appreciation, and many other things like that. But I wouldn't go as far as something monetary. I don't believe in those things. Same with punishment, although I think at the corner we are keeping an eye on cases where it becomes like egregious, somebody that just clicks on everything. Well, that becomes really a big risk for the organization. And somewhere in between, we do a lot of training that's kind of triggered by multiple phishing. So I want to be there proactive, give them maybe a 5 minutes, enroll them automatically in a 5 minutes training or 15 minutes, something short, targeted, trying to bring them up, explain a little bit more. So I think in a nutshell, those are the big tenets of our program there.
So just to follow up, you talk about that someone who can't figure out what not to click on, they present a risk to the organization, could be a significant risk. I mean, can you envision a scenario, and maybe this has happened, where, working with HR through the different steps, through the different, mistakes, someone would have to be separated from the organization?
Yeah, I think that's certainly something extreme, infrequent, and not something that we want to get to. And I think there's plenty of options in the process for anybody to learn a little bit, to pay more attention. I mean, really, we're talking about here, Anthony, a case of egregious lack of responsibility, of basic responsibility. I mean, if you have somebody that just clicks on anything that moves, you
Yeah.
kind of wonder, how do you have the time to click on everything that moves?
Yeah, and it maybe make you concerned about the rest of their job duties, how they're executing those. Steve, your thoughts?
No, it definitely does start at training, and it's about being targeted with the type of phishing. And what we've seen is making it real on annual enrollments, when it's tax season, when it's Halloween, when it's Taylor Swift tickets. Right now everybody's on trying to get NFL tickets, so trying to keep it real on things that we know people will click. But the biggest benefit we've seen is once people click, especially on these phishing exercises, is doing real-time training then and now versus waiting. So I know previously we used to say, we did a campaign, here's like the 20, 30 people that clicked on this or more, and go through and then see, we need to follow up with training. But now we've seen that there's tool sets that it can be real time. They click on the link and it pops up why you shouldn't have clicked on the link, puts you through a training to try to do that real time training. And we're seeing the most bang for our buck on that, on really repeat phishing clickers on that, but also making sure you don't send the same thing out when you're doing org-wide ones, because there's water cooler talk throughout the organization that, oh, hey, did you see this thing that's coming out? So really breaking it up throughout the organization, and really making sure that you do also emphasize the mechanisms that they do report a phish. Because to your point, I think Edwin and Julian both touched on, it just takes one person to report that, and it's able to do that, back end, pulling it out of all inboxes to really better protect the organization. So again, emphasizing, we know not everybody's going to report it. Not everybody's going to read their email in real time. It takes one person to do the wrong thing and click on it, but it also can take one person to really save the rest of the organization associated with that. But also, it's also the mix of also what we spoke to earlier on the banners. We know we don't want it to look like a NASCAR full of sponsors every time you get an email. On known sender, we've seen that very successful, and you don't often get emails from Anthony, or we really see just having that big annoying banner is helpful, because saying that if you see this, that should be the first time that you need to then go through these mechanisms and put that as part of our overall phishing training and awareness. That we know that people sometimes just get numb to alert fatigues associated with that, but it is an ongoing battle, as we say that. It's always look for this. If it's just a reconnaissance campaign, as Anthony spoke to kind of in the onset of this, is it people just asking you hi, or do you want to buy gift cards? Is it people trying to see who they can get to respond to that? Is it then people sending links or attachments and associated, saying that there's different use cases and scenarios as part of that training that we go through? And then now QR codes, because again, this is the way that the threat actors can again circumvent all of this stuff we have just talked about. And then our security partners then have to adjust to do that. That's where I can see AI and other pieces really helping to adapt to these new tactics that they're doing, because obviously it's successful, and that's where they're well funded from R&D perspective. But again, saying that we're never going to send you QR codes. You shouldn't be scanning that to do anything, because that's a way for them to take over your phone, starting to look at MFA takeover and whatnot. So it's just continual game of whack-a-mole on that. So, and then going down to the reward and punishment side, I think it's good to do a mix. Reward as in Cyber Awareness Month to really get people engaged. So incentivize versus reward to doing the right thing. I'm all for incentivizing people to do that. But punishments, that really goes into phishing compliance too. You really have to have long-term data to start to drill into this. Really, the best I've ever seen was my buddy at LifePoint Health to have individual drill down by each site and each person that's clicked over, like 3 and 5 years, they homegrown built something in their analytic tool. But again, just based on the risks of the organization, I think there's other ways you can do before you terminate somebody. Like we've talked about, like for a long time, like our nursing staff really need to receive external emails. So there are different email groups we can look at that they're more, should be internal communications. Or if you have these habitual clickers, instead of terminating them, putting them through some, security boot camp, but also just taking away email privileges or limiting email privileges that we saw in our recent phishing campaign as well, that was hot off our press, that we had 78% of our people that did click were from their iPhones. So we're seeing that people are running between meetings, being quick, especially our remote workers, that will click or see this stuff on the phone, which they most of the time wouldn't do if it was on their, desktop or something they're used to looking at all these other controls. So people looking at, on their Apple Watches, et cetera. We just have to look at these other devices too, and how people train their brains at what they're used to seeing it on, where they see these various emails. So you just have to get creative how you do that and work with HR if you are going to do that. I've had some CISO friends that it's 3 strikes and you're out. I think one of them was a guest on your show too, Anthony, for Phil Alexander. He was one of the most hardcore phishing guys I've ever met. So it's really based on how serious they take it, because this is information security professionals, that we're just one piece of the pie and working with compliance, privacy, and then the legal and HR, because that's really a sanctions policy that they would then enforce based off of data we give them. So,
Steve, very interesting stuff, especially about the sort of the form factors and how that might affect, you think you've got these banners because you're imagining a desktop, right? So you think, okay, the person sees it, this is what they're going to see. And then you realize, oh, look at all these numbers from phones and Apple Watches. Well, they don't see all this stuff, right? What are they seeing? What are they visually seeing? So it's very interesting how you get to customize to the form factor. Edwin, let me bring you in here, give you an opportunity to weigh in. What are your thoughts on what you've heard?
Organizations that I've seen do this well, there's kind of 2 components that I feel like most of them have in common. How do we make phishing not a corporate problem, but how do we make it a personal issue? Because it's not a corporate problem, right? This can happen in your day-to-day life. This can happen in your own Gmail or your Hotmail, right? Next thing you know, you might be trying to buy a house and you've sent money to the wrong person. Like, this can affect your personal life. So making it less about, honestly, the company, but more around, if they do these things, if they're staying on top of their trainings for their own benefit, this is why they should be doing this. That tends to stick a little bit more often. And I think also adapting to the culture of the organization as well, I think is critical. Understanding the culture that you're in, but also understanding that, especially in healthcare, there's different kind of client groups that you all work with, right? You're probably going to treat the doctors maybe a little bit different than some of the rest staff. So that might be the same when it comes to training as well. How you train them, how you engage with them. It shouldn't be a one size fits all. Like, I honestly think of things like manufacturing as another vertical here. People that are going to be in the corporate office versus the people that are on the actual factory work, they're going to be trained a little bit differently. And even transitioning to, hey, this isn't as much about phishing, but it's around safety. They know that word. That's word that they have to keep up with on a day-to-day basis. How do we use the words and terminologies that actually align to them? We'll just make this stickier. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I thought your point about approaching this with your employees as if we're going to train you around phishing, and yeah, we're coming at this from a workplace point of view, but we're helping you as an individual in your personal life, in everything. You need to get your arms around this. We see you making mistakes here, but by helping you here, we're going to help you. Trust us. We're going to help you before you get into trouble in a lot of other areas. That's an interesting way to frame it up.
Yeah, it's always gonna be a little self-serving. We're doing it to protect the organization, right?
Yeah.
But if you can also get them to buy in on that whole personal factor, I think they're more willing to engage there.
Well, I think it makes sense. I think it makes sense. It's not just we're putting this angle on it and it doesn't make sense. It does make sense. It will help them.
Yeah. And there's one other thing that Steven said, when it comes to punishment, it doesn't have to be you're fired, by the way.
Right.
You could lose privileges. So for example, I might turn your URL scanning to a way much more aggressive setting. In that case, Stephen, a 5 instead of a 1, right? There might be more false positives. I might block it actually going to some websites that you actually want to go to that aren't malicious. I don't care. Truthfully, you've proven to me that you click on everything anyways. So maybe I'm not going to 100% remove all your access, but I'm going to start dialing the knob a little bit as far as what you can and can't access.
That's so interesting, Edwin. Steve, that's an interesting approach, right? You know, listen, you're gonna have to live in your spam folder because you brought this on yourself. So everything's going in there, or a lot more stuff's gonna be going in there. So maybe this is a way that will get you to take this more seriously. But then, to your point before, you could still release something out of spam that shouldn't be released. So your thoughts, Steve?
Yeah, we get alerts. It's very laborious that if somebody does pull it out, that is triaged by our security team to make sure that if it is something they pulled out and it is malicious, we make sure to block it. So it's just going back that full circle of life if they do that. So at least it is a way for us to keep it out of line of sight and just educating people that if it's in this folder and you see it and it shouldn't be there, you can release it. We can work with us to mark it as a safe sender, but don't just pull something out because it's in there unless it's, legitimate. So that's a whole nother secondary part to training people on why we're putting these different safeguards in separate from their primary inbox. So almost like we're quarantining it. We're like, remember during COVID, guys, let's put it into ways that you remember. We're quarantining this because it might be sick. We're going to go through and do the temperature checks and all these other screening mechanisms. So making it real to them before you bring it back into Gen Pop. So.
Right. All right. Very good. Julian, let's start with you. What are you doing to ensure that legitimate emails don't get caught in spam filters? As spam filters tighten, do employees need to be trained to check their spam filters? This is kind of important because I think for a lot of people, a junk or spam folder, like they're never looking at it, they're not thinking about it, they're assuming everything's being done properly. And that's just a place that they probably have, 300 to 500 messages, and I got nothing to do with that. Which is a problem if you were trying to calibrate and you're saying, all right, let's be a little high here to get a lot of bad stuff out. People are gonna have to get in the practice of checking these things. You want them in the practice. I think, Steve, you said you send out a digest twice a day, which is interesting, of things that are caught in spam. That's proactive. If you're not doing that, you have to convince people that, hey, you need to look in there. You can't just pretend that doesn't exist. And how easy, you mentioned whitelisting. How easy or should it be for employees to have a legitimate email or sender that has been classified as spam whitelisted? For example, is it one click or do they have to contact IT? So I'm going through my spam filter. Can I just click on it and I'm done? Meaning that email's now in my inbox and that sender is not going to have a problem anymore. Or is it more involved than that, which I think could be a bit of a problem, although security might want it to be more than that. So, Julian, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is a complex topic, and I think part of it is we're talking about spam filters being too tight. That can be a really big dissatisfactor for folks. Missing something that's critical to them, to their career. We definitely don't want to be there. I think the other aspect, as I mentioned earlier, is that the big guy will keep changing the email fish until it gets to the inbox. So I feel like being overly tight with your filters is not going to yield a lot of benefit at the edge. I think just continuing to do that aggressive training, if you will, the right type of training is the key there. I do think for sure that emails that are clearly bad don't even deliver it. And for the rest, not just a digest, but giving the staff options. I mean, digest could be a default way if they prefer to get delivered in the spam. You just have to adapt to that. As far as from a communication perspective, I think this is critical, especially with non-technical folks, which are the majority in our industry, nurses, doctors, physicians, others, just to explain that there are inherent weaknesses in the whole email ecosystem, and there's just no way for any system, even AI ML based, to be able to prevent or make the right decisions all the time. And at the other end, you have to constantly explain the potential impact that one failure can lead to a big impact for the organization. So putting those two out there with the appropriate training gives you quick reaction. I think it's the optimal way to deal with this challenge. And I think the other piece, you've got to make it easy for folks to interact. So if they need to get to something any time of the day, to help desk, get to your messaging team, fall into some preset type of workflow and allow them to get the email that they need, which may be time critical. I think that's something that we need to be accommodative to.
Great points. I especially like your point about, framing this up for your employees in the workforce as this is not going to be perfect, guys, right? It's not going to be perfect. You're not going to get only legitimate emails and you'll get every legitimate email, and we're never going to have an issue. So that's just a misconception of the problem or the issue, right? You have to understand this is not perfect. Edwin, let me bring you in here. What are your thoughts?
I think having the ability to treat detections a little bit differently. So by that I mean things that are obvious viruses, obvious true phishing attacks, stuff like that should either be blocked outright, or worst case scenario, it's an administrator quarantine, never makes it to the end user, right? So I think being clear on what you define that should go down the end user, because the end user should really be dealing at this point spam and gray mail. Those are the ones that are very hard to make some decisions because someone's junk is someone else's gold, right? So I think don't treat all emails the same, making sure that you have different kind of queues, not just end user queues, but administrator queues. I've seen a lot of people take the crawl, walk, run kind of approach. Digest set is probably the easiest thing any organization can do. You don't even have to give them the ability to release or even reject that email. They can simply just see what's in their queue. It just starts to gain a visibility. Then you can actually start to enable actions. I actually want to get to this email. The next step is probably more of a quarantine that's always online. A quarantine, whether it's a web portal, it's a plugin, or whatever it is. But I think little by little, you kind of start to adjust that, because if you give them too much on day one, they're going to complain. They have no idea how to leverage this, right? Email's so critical, but they're so used to their own ways here. There's a balance. Like, how do we make sure we're giving them the protection, but without 100% changing their workflows? Because what healthcare does on a day-to-day basis is saving lives. Like, we can't get in the way of that.
It's such a good point. Steve, anything you want to jump in there?
Yeah, definitely. So, as you spoke to, we've also trained our users not only on this digest that goes out daily, we also taught people and kind of trained them on our policy and our approach to marking things as individually safe. It might be something or a user that you personally need or your department might need, but unless it globally meets the threshold, and we're saying over 50 people in the organization need to do this, we're not going to whitelist it globally. So it's also having those discussions with leadership to say that, guys, here's kind of why we're putting these different checks and balances in. And we enable self-service. We also have this digest and just a reminder of this and this to reach out to IT if you have any issues. Because again, it can get into, oh, we need to whitelist this just because it's going to stop everything. We're like, no, it's not. It's just something that, individually you guys use. So that's something that we're also working with supply chain on, that it all starts with vendor partners you're doing business with. So making sure that you do have a safe vendor list, that's something that we're looking at. It's, almost more work than good we're going to get out of it, but it's going into asset management, third-party risk, all of that, to really look at who our vendors are, who we should be doing business with, to make sure those emails have that clean flight trail to come in. But also, we've seen a lot of our vendor partners that aren't practicing a lot of what we're preaching right here, that have had compromised emails that'll send our supply chain to, make sure you change this payment information to pay us over here. So it's that continual, we're doing this really good, training our users here. And then you have a vendor partner that goes through and you think it's a legitimate email and there's no way to really protect against those kinds of instances. So but it really is just education, really highlighting and making the ease of use for documentation, making sure that you go out to the various leaders to say if there's emails you should be getting. You work with us, we work with supply chain or the signing of a new contract, make sure they call you. So it's also that relationship. If things aren't coming through, that's on their duty to let us know. Vice versa, we've worked with other IT teams to kind of work on those TLS trusts and other pieces with them, and DMARC and all that, other more sophisticated back end pieces. So it's a continual thing, but really to answer that question, it's really just education, and then making it more self-service where we can, and then putting those safeguards for human error in place.
Can I add one thing Steven said that's so key here? Back to the allow less. That should almost be your last resort, because you're basically opening the door at that point. If you do things like allow less, make sure that you put in the notes, you're putting in the change control ticket, the data when you did it. You should always revisit that. Allow less should never be a set it and forget it thing. And the amount of organizations that do is insane. So even when you do allow less, set a note. A month later, 2 months later, that's something I should still be allowing. Just don't leave it out there.
This is such a big issue, and I really am surprised that we don't see more out there, more discussion about this. It is so huge, the disruption to business. And I think of the situation where you have a sender who sent something, and when they don't hear back, they assume there's an assumption that a legitimate email sent will be received. Right? So there's that assumption on the part of the sender. When that is not done, the sender assumes they are being ignored. So if that email was not received, it either was rejected or is in spam, wasn't reviewed properly, this spins itself out in bad ways from a business point of view, from a care point of view. You don't know. You're never told. The person never, you have to assume. You say, do I follow up? No. Do I follow up? Yes or no? And if I follow up through the same method, it may go in the same black hole. So then you think, what do I do? I don't want to annoy this person, but I want to know if they. Anyway, I've been down this road on our end as a business, and I've had to work through this. And it's a very, very unpleasant place to be when you are having issues with your email deliverability and you are winding up in spam folders. You don't know where you are. So it is a huge issue.
And I was going to add,
go ahead, please.
I was going to add to that, the biggest thing that I know that both Edwin and Julian would agree to is marketing is the biggest challenge sometimes on they spoof stuff to send internally for, benefits, for, different marketing things that generally they send that through a third party that then, goes back through. So basically inherently breaking a lot of these controls from spoofing and other pieces that we put in that sometimes go into spam, go into junk, and go into these just because of the nature that they want to send out blast emails. Like most organizations, us being one of those, we don't allow for emails over 500 to come in because that really limits, spear phishing and all of that. So that's where you have to work and sometimes, get really nimble on how you work with internal ways that you're circumventing practices you have in place to support marketing, to support, like the Survey Monkeys, the MailChimps of the world. So just that too, to add into the mix of complexity that we have to deal with, that we're almost setting up ourselves for, we do this and then have to take 3 steps back to allow our marketing teams to send stuff. So.
Right. Are you saying because they're using some third-party sending services that you have not sort of green lighted, and therefore all that stuff's going to go into spam?
Even if you do, like the MailChimps and them of the world, since they're spoofing, say, Renown.org, or our various organizations, we put in safeguards that do block that or send it to spam or make the user think it's phishing because they're saying it says Renown, but then it says, marketing at MailChimp_Renown. So it's like a lot of things that kind of trick our end users on that. So just another thing that we've been.
You have to make sure that you've gotten the word out to marketing and whoever else that, hey, if you're going to use some sort of third party to send emails to our users, we're going to have to discuss this and make sure this is thought out, and because otherwise your emails are not coming through. Right?
And tell us before you do it. Correct.
Right.
So that's another thing. So internal, just on key stakeholders for internal communications that kind of speak to these elements that we we just discussed.
That
This
works
is where
well.
DMARC,
Go ahead.
SPF, DKIM, all that stuff just comes into play at this point. So it's just having visibility of who actually sends on behalf of your brand and your domains is half the issue. Because sometimes you don't even, because they're not coming from your environment actually. So they could not be delivered to your own internal environment, but they might not even be delivered to the customers that you're actually looking to send these emails to. So making sure that you're following best practices. It's marketing emails. There's still best practices to follow here though.
Right. And Edwin, if let's say you've sort of tightened everything up internally and you tell your constituents, including marketing, hey, we've got all these stipulations in place, all these safeguards in place. So if you're going to use a third party to send an email to our employees, we need to talk about it, we need to know about it, and we'll see what we can do. It's very possible they get that message 6 months from now, they forget. They contract with some third, they sign up for something and some service and they send it. They're not coming through. They're not getting through. Those emails are not getting through. So it's continuous. They have to remember, right?
They have to remember, but this is also where you can rely on protocols like DMARC, because if you're failing, well, you're probably not going to know yourself, but a customer that you're dealing with would send you that report says, hey, did you know you're failing because of all these reasons here? Something could be legitimate in there, by the way. So there's always going to be visibility that I think through IT administrators we can get, but ideally you're working with your partnerships, you're working with these other departments, so you're not reacting, they're bringing you into the loop when they're actually doing these things.
Julian, what are your thoughts about who you need? Who do you try and work with on this email stuff? Who do you need to talk to? What other executives to as you go through this?
Yeah, I mean, I think a different part of the challenge is to ensure you have the cybersecurity and email messaging team have the right support, a good level of support from executives across the organization. I think you can easily get into a situation where if the challenges or the limitations, I should say, of the email and email protocols that were invented decades ago before cyber was even an issue, they're inherently limited. And if you get to a point that folks don't understand and there's a constant escalation to either the email teams or the cyber team, it just becomes a frustration. So I think critical being in front of those particularly non-technical, like clinical leaders, nursing leaders, others, explain that the impact of a successful attack, of a threat that comes through email, communicating and explaining why cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. Like in real life, I'm telling them that would you expect that the police or all the other government agency can prevent all crime, and you'd let your jewelry in the window and leave your door open because there's somebody else's responsibility and they are accountable for it. And then lastly, once you tell them the why and the impact, I think you get that level of support. You already explain them the limitation. Hey, you can't be perfect. We'll work with you there to address it. I think that changes the dynamic and the engagement becomes more positive, engaged and supported from all sides. And that's what leads to that right outcome that I mentioned there, where the population engaged gives us that intelligence really quickly and allows us to remove whole campaigns before they affect the organization.
You know, your comparison to sort of law enforcement and the individual's responsibility, you don't just leave your door open and your windows open and say, hey, well, the cops are out there. It's their responsibility to make sure no one comes in. That's an excellent, excellent analogy. Because yeah, the feeling could be, hey, this is Julian's responsibility. I'm going to click on whatever the hell I want. And I don't have to worry about it. It's his job to make sure nothing bad gets through. So it's an excellent point. All right, let's see where we are here. Let's do ask a co-panelist. Edwin, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask one or both of your co-panelists a question.
Oof, tough one. Gentlemen, we haven't touched much on like threat intelligence, but how important is threat intelligence in terms of email threats, email visibility, forensics, and what do you do with that kind of stuff, right? Because I think there's always the world of too much intelligence, too much information becomes white noise. What's the right amount? And yeah, and I guess what do you do with that? I guess Julian, you can start.
Yeah, I can start. Listen, I think it's just critical, especially with email, and I think it's a great opportunity, especially if you're working with great partners in this area, because a campaign typically doesn't start with you. I mean, the chance is so small, right? It could, but it's so small, and having that intelligence from a global firm or through channels where somebody, I don't know, in Asia has seen a certain type of indicator, and that makes it to our preventative systems quickly and keeps us safe from that going forward. I think the key, as I mentioned before, to me, it's all about the time. How can you compress the time? And threat intel is critical.
Steve?
And no, I couldn't agree more. It's information sharing too. HISAC's been instrumental on intel that we get just on what other healthcare organizations are doing, but also part of why I moved to a managed phishing model to that, so that they're getting a lot of this intelligence and baking that into stuff in real time for that tuning, et cetera. Because it's a continual game of cat and mouse. Like you said, they'll just use a new email, create a new domain. So it's ever challenging on that.
By the time it hits a news article, it's probably too late.
Yes.
All right, very good. I think we got time for another one. So, Steve, let me give you an opportunity to ask one or both of your co-panelists a question.
So what is the most, so I guess from training and awareness, how would you guys recommend or have any great stories on success stories, I should say, for training your end users on what to look for?
Edwin, you got some thoughts there?
I was about to give Julian the mic here. No, I think it becomes so for us, it's a lot of just known identifiers, right? Like display names. I think, and going back to mobile phones, there's a reason why malicious actors use display name spoofing. Because when you look at your mobile phones, what happens often? We hide the email address, we just show you the name. So even simple things like, hey, click on that little arrow, expand, and actually show you what the full email address is. Don't just rely on the fact that it says Steven's name or says Julian's name. So there's really like simple things we can do here. I think someone said it earlier, but quick engagement, small videos, things that are like, whether it's humor based or just something that they're going to follow and actually listen to. Because if it's going to be your training that's once a year, this whole essay that they have to do, no one's going to do it or they're going to remember it. So I think just starting simple, starting small, but keeping it in front of their faces and not waiting until that next phishing simulation for them to do an action. There's recommendations that we can offer right away. Let's hit them at the point in time where they just failed a phishing test.
Very good, Julian.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to me, the most important thing is to not forget about the channels that different types of group in your organization really respond to. I mean, the reality is we in IT and cyber, or any other knowledge worker, we work by email sometimes. That's our workflow, but for many, that's not the case. They're on the floor, maybe in the manufacturing equally so. So you gotta find the right channel, be it a daily huddle, somebody can be there and just, for 5 minutes, bottom line up front. This is what we're seeing, this is the why, this is what you'd like to do. Sometimes we just delete or ignore the mail. I mean, particularly nurses or some other busy individuals. So yeah, again, you gotta find the right channels. I'll leave it to that.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Go ahead. Somebody want
I was
to
going to say, I agree. That's the best. I think Julian brought up a very important piece for healthcare. A lot of people don't read emails, especially nurses. So that's one of our best defenses. So.
Yep. No, it's true. It's true. For me, and a lot of people, email is the lifeblood of your business and your work, and it's an integral part of your being. For other people, it is not. It is just not part of their flow. And my wife's a nurse practitioner, and she has a different approach to email, the different way she engages with email, which is not as intense as my engagement. All right, we have time for a quick final thought. So I'll frame it up this way. Steve, we'll go first to you. Your best piece of advice for someone dealing with these issues at a comparable sized organization to yours.
As Edwin said, I think doing the basics and doing the basics well, it's so complex, as you hear about so many moving pieces on internal sending from what marketing and communication need to send versus external sending versus, the device you have to secure if they do click it, do the intakes, the view, scan, etc. That it is just put a plan together. No, you're not going to solve it all overnight. And then even if you do have a plan, you've got to make sure it's flexible, because things are going to change overnight with like the QR code. So this is an ever changing, the most effective tactic for threat actors to get in. So it works for them. So just be adaptive in what you do and focus on the basics.
Excellent, Julian.
I'd say communicate at all levels, why this is important, communicate through the right channels, and then always take a balanced approach at decision making, having the practical mindset in mind. This is just too important to make abrupt or hard decision. And again, let them know that the limits of email in a way that's asking for or making not an excuse, but letting them know that the system is not perfect ahead of time.
Perfect. Edwin, we'll give you the last word.
I'll take it from a technology vendor perspective. First and foremost, make sure that you're getting the most out of what solution that you have. So if your vendor offers things like free health checks or system reviews, I bet you there's been new features that have been rolled out that you might not even know of yet. So the solutions and answers might already be with what you have. You just don't know. Keep your vendors honest. I think the years of, hey, email security is a 3-year project. Every 3 years we'll revisit a new vendor. I don't think so. I think it's probably an annual thing these days. There's so many vendors in the space, and I think it's everyone, and it's a healthy competition. But people are trying to.
Yep, I think Edwin froze up there. Steve, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think Edwin froze up there. So that was the last word anyway. So I think we're going to wrap it here. If Edwin comes back on, we'll finish with his thought. But regarding continuing education, you could use the final slide in this deck. You'll get an email when the on-demand recording is ready for viewing. If you want to sponsor an event with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team, and you can go to our website to register for upcoming panels. So Edwin's back. Edwin, you're back?
Of course, but I'm
All
like
right.
the most important thing, and then
I mean, it was
just freeze.
Your brilliant final thought. So I think you froze up again. All right, Edmund, we'll have to get you to email us about that. There you are. You're back.
We're good.
We're good. Okay. All right. So as I mentioned, you can go to our website and register for upcoming panels. With that, I want to thank our tremendous panel, Julian Mihai, Steve Ramirez, and Edwin Moreno. I want to thank Mimecast for sponsoring and making the event possible. And I want to thank you for attending. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.